going on?
Not too much, just sitting in front of the world's most beautiful OXXO.
Yeah, and it is pretty beautiful. It looks like an OXXO on the front, but if you walk inside, there's a big window and a bunch of tables, which is pretty cool, and a view of the Pacific Ocean.
Yeah, and this OXXO is just a little bit south of Mismaloa and close to Boca de Tomatlan in Jalisco.
And so, what are we doing here?
We are on a road trip down to Barra de Navidad, which is on the border of Jalisco and Colima, and we're also going to Manzanillo to take off another state in Mexico.
Yeah, which is in Colima.
Yeah.
So, we're just south of Puerto Vallarta, just starting a road trip, and we're going to take you guys along the way with us, but off we go.
Hello and welcome to the World Wanderers podcast, a proud part of the Wander Barn Podcast Network.
I'm Ryan.
I'm Amanda.
And we're your hosts.
We're a traveling couple and digital nomads taking you on our adventures as we explore locations, destinations, and careers.
Enjoy the show.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the World Wanderers podcast. We are very excited that you're joining us on today's adventure. And as you heard before the intro, we are headed to Barra de Navidad and Manzanillo.
Yes, so we recorded this back in the fall while we were living in Puerto Vallarta without intentions of coming back. We are now back as we record this intro. And we wanted to take an adventure, so we started planning, hey, where would be a great place to drive? And we're looking at the map and saw that Manzanillo and Colima were just a few hours south of here. So we planned a rental car and went on the adventure. And as you heard in that very first clip, one of our first stops was the most beautiful OXXO in the world. Was the most beautiful OXXO in the world, which is actually not very far south of Puerto Vallarta. It's just past Mismaloa. And then we continue on south from there. So if you're not a huge knower of Mexican geography, Puerto Vallarta is in the state of Jalisco. And it's actually really close to the northern border, only a few minutes driving and you'll be in Nayarit, which is where Sayulita is. And then to the south of Jalisco is Colima, if you're on the coast at least. But that's more of a few hours driving from Puerto Vallarta.
Yeah, and so when we were looking where we wanted to go and what adventure we wanted to take, we thought it would be really cool to take off a new state, Colima. And as we were looking at places to stay, we discovered Barra de Navidad. And this is a small town that's located just 60 kilometers north of Manzanillo, and Barra de Navidad in English actually translates to Christmas sandbar. It's got a pretty small population. It's about like 7,000 people, and it's mostly like a farming and fishing community located on the east end of Bahia de Navidad. And so we thought, why not check out this, interesting little place that we hadn't heard of until we started doing research? We can spend, a little bit of time exploring there and then also check out Manzanillo. Manzanillo is obviously a little bit of a bigger city and somewhere that maybe you have heard of because it has been a pretty big tourism destination, at least it used to be. And now it's really known for its massive port. It actually contains Mexico's busiest port, and that port is responsible for handling a lot of the Pacific cargo that goes to Mexico City. So a lot of cargo is coming in on big ships, and then it's getting, transported to Mexico City and obviously other places in Mexico. So we'll talk about Manzanillo a little bit more. We're going to meet you guys just about 30 minutes outside of Barra de Navidad, give you a bit more information about, our trip, what we've been up to, what the drive is like, what it's like to drive in Mexico, and so much more. All right, friends, we are about 30-ish minutes outside of Barra de Navidad, so we are almost there. We've been driving for, 3.5 hours now?
I'd say about that, yeah.
How are you feeling? How's our road trip been so far?
Great. I think it's pretty cool out right now. The sun's just starting to set. We're closing in on the coast, kind of driving parallel to it, and it's interesting driving the 3-ish hours because you cross out of the mountains and coast, which is really jungly by Vallarta, and then go over kind of some higher plains where things dry out, and then you come down on this side and while you're back on the ocean, it's kind of like a different climate, different geography entirely.
Yeah, it is interesting. It feels a lot drier here. There's no jungle. We're still surrounded by mountains. We've got, the ocean to our right and the mountains to our left, and there is like green foliage, but it's not as lush as it is in Puerto Vallarta.
For sure, yeah, and been a little surprised by how quiet the drive's been. Not a ton of traffic, just kind of trucks, and most of the little towns on this road don't seem like really small, really Mexican towns.
Yeah, we honestly haven't seen very much at all. We've just passed very, 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 very small towns. I think we've passed a couple of Pemexes, which is a major gas station here. And yeah, we haven't seen a lot along the way, but it's been a very interesting drive. It's very beautiful. We're right in nature. And like Ryan said, it's been pretty relaxed, although it's a pretty curvy drive, I would say.
Yeah, I have a tiny bit of that like car sick feeling from all the up, down, curves, stop, starts, speed bump type of maneuvers.
Yeah, why don't we talk a little bit about what it's like to drive in Mexico? Because we've driven in a couple different Latin American countries, Panama, Costa Rica. We've driven in Mexico before, but maybe let's just talk a little bit about what that's like, because I'm sure somebody's thinking like, oh my God, you're driving in Mexico. That sounds a bit crazy, when really it's pretty chill.
Yeah, it's super chill. I think like Costa Rica's definitely been like the worst in my experience. I think here too in Mexico, there's lots of like really big newer interstates if you're driving between big cities. We're kind of off on like secondary highway, so it's one lane each way. Depending on where you are, like a few times along the drive, the quality of the road's gotten a bit iffy, where there's like quite a few potholes and stuff like that. And then honestly, the biggest hazard is that in some of these small towns, there's some rogue speed bumps that you it can be a bit challenging to spot. And this was the same as when we drove out in Quintana Roo and Yucatan. Some just like speed bumps out of nowhere that you kind of got to pay attention to.
Yeah, that one was a little bit sketchy because we arrived to Cancun like after work. So the sun was down by the time we got our car and headed on our way. And I remember I was driving at that point, or on that trip, I should say. And I remember just like trying to look so closely to see where there were speed bumps, because they would just show up out of nowhere. Sometimes there's signs for them, sometimes there's not. Sometimes there's like the yellow paint on them so you see them, and sometimes they just come out of nowhere and you end up kind of bottoming out your car, off-roading a little bit more than you planned to.
For sure, yeah.
So do you want to share a little bit about what our plans are for the weekend, why we are excited about this trip, and just why we're doing this in general?
Sure, yeah. So we were kind of thinking it'd be good to take an adventure. And something we've been thinking about more recently is the idea of how cool it would be to go to all the states in Mexico eventually. And so we thought, what better time to start on that than right now? So Colima is just down from Jalisco on the coast. And so we thought, okay, maybe it would be good to go to Manzanillo in Colima. And then kind of starting to look at that, we discovered Barra de Navidad, which is like just across the border, which seems to be like kind of a sleepier, maybe not so sleepy, but a smaller beach town, like a small beach town with not much else going on. So we thought that could be cool, and just getting out driving would be a fun adventure.
Yeah, absolutely. So Barra de Navidad is about 3.5, 4 hours from Puerto Vallarta, like Centro. And then Manzanillo is about like 45 minutes to an hour further south across the Jalisco border into Colima. And so we're going to stay in Barra de Navidad for the weekend, like Friday and Saturday, but we are going to head into Manzanillo tomorrow to go check that out, and then of course take off the state of Colima from our list. So that'll be pretty awesome. It's a pretty small state, and I think Manzanillo is kind of like the main attraction there outside of the city of Colima, which is pretty small actually. So it'll be cool to check that out tomorrow, and also to discover this new little beach town that honestly I had never heard of even a week ago.
Yeah.
All right, so we have just a little bit more in our drive, and then we're going to check into our Airbnb, probably go get some food, watch the sunset, and we will update you guys a little bit later. All right, so we have arrived in Barra de Navidad, and we just enjoyed some delicious dinner at a local spot here called El Manglito. We enjoyed some ceviche and a molcajete with shrimp. What are your first impressions so far of this little beach town?
Yeah, and as we should say before we dive too much into it, that we are out on a little walkway point, and so you can hear the waves in the background, maybe a bit of wind. It's actually a really nice, almost summer breeze feeling of warm but a little bit cool wind. 27 degrees out.
Celsius, we should add.
Yeah, at 7:30 p.m. So yeah, overall, it's a pretty cool little area. So it's kind of fronts onto the Pacific Ocean, but then is actually the gateway into a fairly large lagoon. Apparently, a long time ago, this was a port that the Spanish used for their fleet before leaving for whatever you want to call it, trips to Asia. And so it's like a nice protected bay that's quite substantial in size. Seems like now there's a lot of fishing here, and it's actually pretty calm and pretty quiet, which I imagine has a lot to do with the ongoing pandemic situation. But yeah, really cool, interesting, chill place.
Yeah, I didn't really know what to expect about this town because we didn't really know much about it coming in. We just had heard that it was a really nice spot to visit, especially since we wanted to check out Manzanillo, and that's really close by. But I really like it. It's very walkable because it's quite small. We have a nice little Airbnb that's right near the center of town. It took us about 10 minutes to walk to dinner. And then like Ryan said, we're on kind of a little Malecon where we're right by the ocean, as you can hear, and it's just very relaxed. And Puerto Vallarta is pretty relaxed as well, I would say in general, but much, much busier. So it's kind of nice to just be sitting, enjoying some space, not near other people. And there's just a couple other, groups of people kind of walking about, enjoying the evening. And yeah, I think so far, so good.
Yeah, and so we're going to head back to our place, and then tomorrow we're going to take a trip into Manzanillo in our trusty little Nissan Versa rent-a-car. Manzanillo is about an hour away from here, and pretty soon after leaving Barra de Navidad, you cross into Colima, and then Manzanillo, I think, is the capital of Colima.
I don't know, because there's also Colima City, so...
Okay, that's probably the capital.
Yeah, I think Colima probably is. We'll fact check.
And Manzanillo we'll talk all about in the morning.
Have a great night. All right, friends, I fact checked it, and the capital of the state of Colima is Colima.
Yes.
Yeah, and so we thought we would dive into talking a little bit about why we chose to stay in Barra de Navidad over Manzanillo, because the purpose of our trip was really to go down to Colima, check out a new state, explore Manzanillo, which is a city that was totally new to us. So do you want to talk a little bit about why we decided to do that?
Yeah, so originally we were thinking, like we mentioned, of this being a great way to see Colima and kind of mark it off our list of the states to go to. And we hadn't driven in this point in Mexico. Since then, we've rented cars in a couple different cities and gotten a bit more comfortable with the roads. But we were thinking, hey, driving into a bigger city like Manzanillo, we're looking at the accommodations, not finding stuff we were falling in love with, and thinking, what would be cool, finding somewhere maybe a bit outside of that is a bit more chill. That's a great place to drive to, and it could be a bit more like low-key relaxed, and then take a day trip and go explore Manzanillo in the day. And so that's where we started looking around, and then we stumbled upon Barra de Navidad as an option. It seemed like a really cool, interesting place. It seems like a place where there are a decent amount of retirees who are basing themselves there. It's kind of a strange place, which we'll dive more into as we get into the episode. But we thought, what a great way to see kind of two different places, to get to explore a new state, new city, but also to have a bit more of a chill weekend adventure.
Yeah, absolutely. And like we talked about in that last clip, like Barra de Navidad really is a very relaxing place to go, at least at the time of year and the time that we went there. You know, there was lots open and lots to do, or enough to do. I shouldn't say lots. There was enough for us to do and enough restaurants for us to have lots of different options as to what we wanted to eat and that type of thing, you know, but it allowed us to kind of have a more relaxed sort of vibe. PV is quite busy. Manzanillo is quite busy, as we'll talk about. So it was nice to do that. And then another thing that was really great about this option is, like I mentioned before, it's about 60 kilometers. Barra de Navidad's about 60 kilometers north of Manzanillo. So it was really great because we were super close there, but it also made our drive to and from there a little bit shorter, which is always nice.
Yeah, and one neat fact about Barra de Navidad is that in the lagoon that's there, you're actually like looking at Colima. So there's a restaurant at a hotel that you have to take a boat across to get to that's actually in Colima State. So it's right on the border.
Yeah, and so after our first night in Barra de Navidad, we woke up on Saturday morning and we drove to Manzanillo, and we are going to check in with you from the centro part of Manzanillo City. Hello from Manzanillo.
Yes, we are right by the gigantic abstract blue marlin, which everyone knows.
Yeah, if you do a Google search of Manzanillo, this gigantic blue marlin will come up, and it's right in the city center, right by the port. So we're right on the water by one of the bays. The Manzanillo sign is close by, and there's lots of people in the background taking photos of the marlin, so you can probably hear them.
Yeah, and so this morning we drove over from our little Airbnb abode into Colima, into Manzanillo, which was about an hour on the road, huh?
Yeah, I think it was just a bit more than an hour to get to this side of Manzanillo, because this is pretty much as far as you can go within the city. Like, this is as far south, I guess, as you would probably be going. And so it's about 45 minutes before you hit the, I guess, more northern side of Manzanillo, and then another 15-20 to get through the city. And we kind of took a ring road that took us around the city. But Manzanillo is pretty big, and it's got a couple bays.
Yeah, and a very big port. It's known for having the biggest port in Mexico with like the highest volume of stuff, and just driving around, looking around, certainly seems like that could be the case. There's a ton of big freighters, shipping containers everywhere, and just a lot of activity out in the water. It is a pretty interesting looking area because, like you said, the different bays and there's the islands and mountains around. Kind of a cool spot. And then the drive over was pretty cool as well.
Yeah, so let's talk about that for a minute, because I think that it was really interesting to go from Barra de Navidad, where, like we said yesterday, it was a little bit drier, a little bit less lush in climate than Puerto Vallarta is. But as we headed a little bit further south, we headed inland slightly, and all of a sudden there was a lot of lush greenery. We saw a ton of palm trees, a ton of banana trees. And as we arrived into Manzanillo, we can see the mountains sort of surrounding the bays, and it's very, very lush here, very green, and we can definitely feel the heat and the humidity.
Yeah, definitely we're sitting on a bench right now in a tiny bit of shade, but I can feel the sun on my legs and feel kind of like I'm melting.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about first impressions sort of Manzanillo as we were driving in?
Yeah, so kind of like you mentioned, you drive kind of over a bit of a mountain and then into more of like a flatland area as you kind of get towards Colima. It's pretty cool because it just opens up and there's like a sea of banana trees, which is pretty sweet. And then, yeah, Manzanillo, it's kind of the first thing that strikes you is the water and the bay, quite a big town, and then like the freighters around. But we parked over by the port and walked over to this area, and it seems like, yeah, a decent handful of people around. Lots of things that kind of look a little bit run down. Seems to be a bit of a vibe.
Yeah, a lot of buildings, I should say, are very white. So it's kind of got this sort of like stuck in time beach vibe about it.
Yeah, white, but not like used to be very pure white and not really the case anymore.
Yeah, it's interesting though. I think, there's a lot of kind of mountain areas and there's some colorful homes up on the mountain. And I think you can get some sort of picturesque bits of Manzanillo. And I'm curious to see what it's like as we explore a couple more parts of the city.
Yeah, this area is really dominated by the port, and so we're going to go check out a couple different beachish spots a little bit on the way today.
All right, so we'll check back in with you later.
In the world of travel and adventure, it's easy to say, someday I'm going to do this, or someday I'm going to see that. But our friends at Frost River are challenging all of us to start seeking our somedays today.
Frost River adventure gear isn't just made with durability in mind. It's made with your next adventure at heart. With a bag or pack from Frost River, you can find adventure in the everyday.
For the past 2 decades, Frost River has set the standard in adventure packs, bags, and gear. Now they're raising the bar. Not only do they source made in the USA materials to handcraft each and every pack, they also repair packs to thwart throwaway culture, and are now using solar energy to create even less waste without compromising quality.
Whether your next adventure is a stroll through a local park or a backcountry camping trip, Frost River has the sustainably made gear that you need.
So stop waiting for your next adventure and start seeking your someday today at frostriver.com/wanderers and use the promo code WANDERERS for free shipping on your next order. Once again, that's www.frostriver.com/wanderers and use the code WANDERERS at checkout.
Thanks so much to Frost River for sponsoring this episode of the show. All right, so since we checked in last at the Centro of Manzanillo, we've done 2 other stops. One was along one of the bays, and the other one is at a beach club in Santiago Bay.
Yeah, so we grabbed a nice, refreshing, cool beverage and drove along Boulevard Miguel de la Madrid, which is a long street that you can't actually see the ocean too well through, but runs kind of parallel to the ocean. One thing that's really cool about Manzanillo is just how epic the amount of beach is, because you go from there and then kind of over a hill, and then around to the other side, which is the beach we ended up being on this afternoon. And again, just a huge beach as far as the eye can see. And we went out all the way to closer to La Boquita, to an interesting beach club thing called Oasis.
Yeah, it's crazy how much beach is here. As you're driving along Boulevard Miguel de la Madrid, you're just seeing beach, beach, beach for days. And it's this gigantic bay. It's really beautiful. It is, just a massive stretch of beach with tons of different restaurants, areas where you could just lay out your towel, beach clubs, all that type of stuff. And we went to, like Ryan said, a beach club that was recommended to us by a friend's blog. And it was a pretty nice afternoon.
Yeah, very nice beach, nice waves. Compared to some other beaches on the Pacific coast, it's really long, stretches out quite a ways into the distance. So made for nice walking. And now we are back in our trusty automobile, getting ready to head back to Barra de Navidad, and call it a night.
Yeah, and so just from this little day trip that we've had to Manzanillo, what do you think of Manzanillo overall?
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard to know just from driving around it for a day, but this beach area is really nice. I think the port side of it, which, as you would imagine, isn't quite as nice, but the beach areas are really nice. It seems like there's a decent amount of expat retirees down here, and then a lot of Mexicans who are here vacationing and stuff. It seems definitely a bit more low key, which I imagine it's been probably a bit more affected by the pandemic than Puerto Vallarta has. But nice place, nice beach. Definitely seems to be whereas PV seems to be buzzing and growing and lots of new buildings going up, here it seems a bit more in stasis decline.
Yeah, and this is something I had read when we decided to come to Manzanillo. It was sort of this was a booming beach town in the 80s, and then the government invested more in the port because they make a lot of money off of that. It's Mexico's biggest port, so they get, everything coming into Mexico is coming via Manzanillo, and haven't really, continued to, work on the tourism here. And I feel you feel that just with the buildings, and their architecture and the businesses and that type of thing, it definitely feels like this is a bit stuck in time, I guess you could say.
Yeah, but again, like it's 4 hours from Guadalajara, so like a nice, easy, beautiful beach to get to. A bit of a drive from PV, but like a cool place to stop. I don't know if I'd plan a trip here, like if this was the thing I was going to do, but I'm happy we came down and checked it out.
Yeah, absolutely. Excited that we got to visit Colima and excited to head back to Barra de Navidad for one more night and then back to PV.
Yeah, so let's get on our way.
Vamos! All right, so in that last clip, we mentioned that we went to a beach club in Manzanillo. It was really awesome because the beaches there are just gorgeous. The weather was stunning. The temperatures were hot, hot, hot. We spent a couple of hours, having food and just hanging out on the beach and just enjoying, the views and that type of thing before we headed back to Barra de Navidad for one last dinner there. And we catch up with you next at our final breakfast in Barra de Navidad. Well, friends, we are here at La Casa de mi Abuela, which is sitting down to enjoy our final breakfast here in Barra de Navidad before we make our way back to PV. So we're going to eat some breakfast and then we'll check in a little bit and let you know how our trip was. All right, so we are back at Boca de Tomatlan, which if you remember from the beginning of this episode, that's about 30 minutes south of Puerto Vallarta along the southern coast, which means we are almost done our road trip. So we've been in the car for about 3.5 hours at this point. How has the drive been so far, Ryan?
Good. Yeah, it's been pretty easy and straightforward. A little bit of like craziness on the way, but overall pretty good.
When you say craziness, what are you referring to?
Just people passing and situations that seem very unsafe to pass in, and speed bumps along the way and things of that nature, but yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because we talked about earlier on how driving in Mexico is pretty chill overall, and I think that that's still what we would say. But we're driving in a place that is, I guess, a smaller highway, smaller towns. And so there's a lot of sort of things that we're just not used to seeing coming from Canada. Big trucks with a bunch of people in the back of them, passing on a double solid. This road's very curvy. We drive from right along the coast, through the mountains, back to another coast. And there's a lot of curves along the way. I think that that's probably something that makes this road kind of interesting, and there's just a lot of shenanigans kind of happening along the way, but overall it's been really good. And do you want to just talk about overall how the weekend was and what you kind of thought of our experience in Barra de Navidad and Manzanillo?
Yeah, it was a really fun trip, pretty short trip, and as we drive over some bumps in the road, which you might be able to hear, our Nissan absorbing on the way. Yeah, it was a pretty fun trip. There was, I think, we didn't have the highest expectations. We were like, oh, it'd just be cool adventure to get a car, to go on a bit of a road trip, to see a new part of the country, to see a new state. And I think we definitely checked all those boxes. Really happy we stayed in Barra de Navidad. We had a great breakfast this morning, which is really tasty, and we were able to walk around, and I was able to go walk out earlier and watch the sunrise, which was really beautiful. So that was awesome, but definitely also excited to be back. I feel like getting a little home base set up in Puerto Vallarta, so excited to be back.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was a really cool trip to go on. I think it was fun to rent a car and drive down the coast and check out 2 new towns and 1 new state. And I think overall I liked both places. I don't feel a strong desire to go back to either Barra de Navidad or Manzanillo. I think there's probably, lots of other cool things that they have to offer. But for me, I feel like they were interesting to check out, and I'm not, dying to go back anytime soon.
Yeah, and this is something, but the drive is really, I think, quite spectacular, especially we're driving back into the coastal area right now, so we're winding through the jungle down a hill and then on occasional corners, you see the ocean open up in front of you, which is pretty amazing. And so it's been pretty cool the whole way. There's always, like, there's some parts that aren't particularly interesting, but I feel like driving around, you get like a sense for a place in a different, interesting way. And especially when you're driving, you see it a lot more than if you're on a bus and maybe not really paying as much attention. So it's been cool to kind of see what some of those smaller towns look like, and see the coastal areas, and see some of the big banana plantations and farming agricultural areas, and what the islands look like and that type of thing. So that was been really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we are going to head back home, wrap up our trip, drop our rental car off, and then we'll be back into our regular life with Puerto Vallarta. So if you are down in PV and you get the chance to rent a car, or maybe even go on a tour or take a bus or something like that down to Barra de Navidad or Manzanillo, I think it's definitely a worthwhile experience. But like Ryan said, it's been really awesome renting a car to have a little bit of our own freedom and just being able to have a bit of adventure.
So we finished our 3.5-ish hour drive back to Puerto Vallarta. We took a quick stopover at our place and then went to return the rental car. Overall, it was a pretty smooth actual like driving experience with the rental car. But when you're renting cars, sometimes, like especially in Mexico or other Latin American countries, you kind of have to expect the unexpected sometimes. So we felt really happy that we had no car issues. One thing that I think is worth touching on is probably having a bit of a fight at the actual car rental place. Should we touch on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's good to always keep it real. And I think that for anyone who has traveled quite a bit, you know that there's moments that are just, far from glamorous. And picking up a rental car should feel like something that's really exciting, because then you have wheels, you get to go on your way. It should be very smooth and easy. And in general, I feel like our experiences renting cars around the world have been, pretty smooth, but we have had some issues, particularly with Alamo in Mexico. I have no idea why we rented with Alamo for a second time after having an issue with them in Guadalajara in 2018, I think it was, or maybe 2019. But we rented from Alamo via Priceline. We showed up and they told us they didn't have any cars. It turned out they did have cars, but not for the price we'd paid. And we ended up having to call head office and then fight with the person. And something that could have been, 15 to 30 minutes to get our car ended up taking us an hour plus to get it.
Yeah, and so kind of the takeaways from this for anyone who's listening and thinking about renting a car abroad or in Mexico specifically, renting through Priceline in the States and Canada seems to work like no problem, but it does seem to create problems sometimes in Mexico, where 2 times with Alamo particularly, we've had our Priceline reservation, we've shown up and they've been told us we don't have any cars. One time that was true, they didn't have cars. This time in Vallarta wasn't true. They had cars, they had the exact car, but I guess didn't want to rent it to us at the price that the online service had given. And so they said, hey, we don't have any cars. And we're like, what do you mean you don't have cars? And then by calling National, calling Alamo, they're like, yeah, we have your reservation, we have the price. In the store, they were telling us a different price. So what they were actually doing was adding days to our trip and adding all the extra packages while telling us they weren't doing that and refusing to give us a breakdown of the prices, so that it came to a cost that was super high. I don't know if this was their attempt to get us to leave and go somewhere else, or to just try to get more money out of us because maybe they were low on cars and our reservation wasn't going to make them much money. So we did have to kind of, we were patient and we called actual Alamo. I'm like, can you tell us the prices? They're not giving us a breakdown here. And they were able to tell us the prices. So we were going back to the counter and saying, hey, they're saying the price should be this price. You're telling us a different price. And then they were kind of eventually saying things like, oh, it's because you had an extra day, even though before they'd said we'd confirmed the actual dates we want. Oh, it's because you had paid for the full insurance, which before they were telling us that didn't include insurance. So they're doing some shifty stuff in the office, so definitely would not recommend renting with them. We've since rented a couple times with National in Mexico and had a much smoother experience. I don't really know a ton about the car rental business, if maybe Alamo is doing more of like a franchise thing where the individual offices have more freedom and then want to like, take advantage of people who maybe don't speak Spanish. We do speak Spanish, so we were able to like read everything and understand and kind of go back and forth and argue with them about things. Anyway, so that was kind of the experience. The car itself was totally fine, had no problems. And then upon returning the car, had no problems either. But just to be aware, if you're renting a car in Mexico, usually it can be helpful, even though the prices may be higher, to go directly through the reservation system at the car company, because it seems like with Priceline, even though they're getting the reservation, they kind of view that as like if we're not going to like do anything to make this reservation happen. We've talked to lots of people who have made reservations, and you show up and they don't have the cars and they don't really seem to care to help you with it. So just something to be aware of.
Yeah, absolutely. And then just one other thing to note, particularly if you're going to be renting a car in Mexico, is that you are required to use like their insurance. So there's always that added cost. And you can add that on when you purchase online. I probably wouldn't do it if you're doing it via Priceline. But if you are going directly via the site like National or something like that, you could add it. But we usually just add that when we get to the office, because then they can break down the prices a little bit better for us. So that's just something to keep in mind. But it always does it just kind of puts like a bad taste in your mouth when you're really excited about a trip. And then, something like that happens. Fortunately for us, we've had so many things happen to us on the road that we were just like, okay, no problem. We're going to let this go, just enjoy ourselves once we had our car. And we definitely did. The other thing that we wanted to mention that we hadn't talked about, so far in this episode, another, I guess, not great thing that happened, is that we both did get a little bit of an upset stomach, a little bit of food poisoning from one of our meals. And so we were a little bit low energy and not feeling the best when we went to Manzanillo. And again, this is just part of the traveling experience, especially when you're traveling somewhere that, the food may not be prepared in the way that your stomach wants it, or there might be, contaminated water or something like that. It happens to all of us. And for us, we just made the best of our experience. And I think we still had a really good time, despite the fact that Friday night was a little bit rough for me, and Saturday we were both definitely operating at a lower percentage in terms of how well we were feeling.
Yeah, it's funny going through and making this episode, thinking back to those moments in Manzanillo. It was really, really hot. I think, Amanda, you were feeling a little bit better than I was, and I was just like struggling through the day. But overall, it was a fun trip. It's something I'm really glad we did, to be able to see a little part. And like we talked about in this episode, being able to drive, I think, gives you a totally different feeling for a place. If you show up at the airport, like if you fly from the States, show up at the airport in Puerto Vallarta, do your trip here, leave, like you're not, you don't really see a whole lot. And for sure, driving through a place doesn't mean a place, but just being able to spend a few hours and see what the smaller towns are like and all that stuff really gave us a good experience. And Manzanillo, I think, for both of us, really caught us with just how beautiful and big the beach was there.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of interesting, it's many months later, we're listening back to this, and I think I said I liked both places, but maybe don't want to go back. And I actually feel like that's not the case for me anymore. I think both places were quite interesting, and I think we only just got a little taste of them. I think Barra de Navidad is a great place if you want to be a bit more off the grid or have a really quiet vacation. And I think Manzanillo has lots to offer, and just thinking about how stunning those beaches were, I would definitely go back, I think, to both at this point.
For sure. Yeah, I would definitely go check out both. If you're like coming to Mexico for the first time, they're probably not on the top of my list, but if you explored quite a bit of Mexico, I think they're cool places to explore. And I think the southern coast of Jalisco, I know, has something very cool, more like remote, if you want to use that word, beaches to go to. So if you had a car, Barra de Navidad could be a really cool base to go to. And it seemed like a cool community as well. Probably a little bit different being there in November of 2020 than normal, but it seems like there's a decent community there of people. And so, yeah, lots of interesting stuff to explore around there. And I think really cool spot, especially if you're if you're driving and able to explore more of the area around there, I think is an awesome place to check out.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think we'll wrap up this episode here. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed this little road trip that we took you on. It's definitely fun for us to listen back and just get to relive this. So hopefully it makes you feel inspired to maybe get out there and enjoy a little road trip weekend, whether that's in Mexico or somewhere else. And yeah, just thanks for listening.
As always, we will see you next time. Thanks for listening to this episode. If you want more, make sure to check out the World Wanderers Insider, available on Patreon at patreon.com/theworldwanderers.
For show notes, head over to theworldwanderers.com. Find us on social media at The World Wanderers Podcast and join the private Facebook community at World Wanderers, a community for travelers.
You can always get in touch with us at info@theworldwanderers.com. And if you enjoyed the show, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. It really helps us find new listeners.
See you next time.